The Bible doesn't say that debt is sinful. It says something far more dangerous. And once you understand this, you'll never sweep your credit card the same way again. One of the most misunderstood verses about money is Proverbs 22 verse number 7. Most people read it and conclude that all debt is sinful. But that is not what that verse says. The borrower is a slave to the lender. Notice, it doesn't say that debt is forbidden. It says debt make you a slave. And you know one of the characteristics of a slave is having fewer options in life, less freedom, and fewer choices. But here's the question most people never ask. What kind of debt creates that slavery? Because debt isn't the enemy. Bad debt is. Debt is renting tomorrow to improve today. It is wise when it finances production. It is destructive when it finances consumption. Let me show you why. Imagine hearing a knock at your door. The creditors have come. Not for money. You have nothing left anyway. They have come for your children. And that is exactly where a widow finds herself in the book of 2 Kings. Her husband is dead and all is left is debt. Desperate for help, she longs to Elijah. In such a case, most people expect a miracle or something of sort. But Elijah gives her strange instructions. She tells her, go and borrow jars. Not few, as many as she can find. And why jars? You may be asking that question. Because jars are capacity. The widow pours her tiny amount of oil and it keeps flowing. Jar after jar after jar fills up. She takes that oil and sells it, pay every debt, and lives off the surplus. And this story reveals a very powerful blueprint. First, borrow capacity. Secondly, produce value. Thirdly, repay the debt. And fourthly, live off the abundance. Most people reverse the process. Borrow, consume, struggle, repeat. And that is how the debt cycle is created. The widow didn't borrow for a nicer house or a newer chariot. She borrowed capacity, something that could create value. And that is how she borrowed her way out of debt. Imagine two people borrowing $10,000. One spends it on a vacation. The other buys equipment that doubles the outcome of his business. 5 years later, one has memories. The other has an asset still producing income. And that is the difference. Today, many people finance consumption. Things like vacations, phones, clothes, lifestyles. Only a few finance production. Things like tools, skills, inventory, equipment, opportunities that increase future income. Next time before you borrow money, you need to ask yourself one question. Will this put money in my pocket or take money out of it? And by the way, that is the difference between an asset and a liability. You see, asset is anything that puts money into your pocket. On the other side, liability is something that takes money out of your pocket. So ask yourself again, will this put money in my pocket or take money out of it? The answer tells you whether you are increasing your future capacity or reducing it. Wealthy people tend to ask that question first. Fundamentally, the problem is not borrowing money. It is borrowing for things that decline in value, things that impress strangers but impoverish their owners. And that is the trap. But tools, skills, and capacity, those create freedom. Here is the real principle. Debt limits options. Wealth creates them. One builds pressure, the other builds freedom. The goal isn't merely avoiding debt. The goal is becoming so valuable, so disciplined, and so wise that debt becomes unnecessary. Or when it is used, it funds production, not consumption. Because financial freedom begins when your future belongs to you, not to the bank, not to a lender, not to monthly payments, but to you. The widow escaped debt because she borrowed jars, not luxuries. She borrowed her way to freedom. So before the next purchase, ask yourself, am I borrowing another jar or another burden? Comment production if this changed how you see debt. And tell me, what is one thing you financed that you wish you hadn't?